Hello everyone, welcome back to the Tabletop and Hobby Stop. My name is Michael. Today I'm coming at you with a terrain build. I had an extra miniature of Sinestro from the DC Miniatures game by Night Models. And then also I had bought this Ice Cubes gum, and I have a bad habit of removing the wrapper on everything. And I saw that shape and got super inspired to build a statue. And who better to do it with than the egomaniac Sinestro. So this is a really quick and easy process. The drying time is the worst part, but if you take all of that out, the total working time is probably about an hour, maybe 2 hours, depending on how fast you work. So we can get right into it, and I will put a list of all of the materials I use down in the description. I didn't want to leave you guys hanging, so I wanted to show my Sinestro here in the beginning. Like I said, these are DC Universe Miniatures game by Night Models, and they actually paint up really awesome. They have a lot of really good muscle definition. They are a little bit more brittle models just because they are not heroic. They're not chunky or anything. They're a little bit more thin than most models you come across. But that is my Sinestro. I'm very proud of him. And this guy I got in a villains pack with Cheetah and Gorilla Grodd and a couple other characters. But it was cheaper to get him and get the double Sinestro than to rebuy it. So to start out the process, I was inspired by this gum container. I thought it looked like a really cool plinth, and I really wanted to do something with it. That cut that you see in between the two, I'm going to use that later on to distinguish two separate areas of this statue. But first we got to do something about this top, because when Sinestro is just sitting on the top, he looks a little bit sunken in and not as heroic as I was going for. So I grabbed the top of a milk carton, and I thought that was about the perfect size to make what I wanted, but it sat a little bit too tall. You can see he kind of sits up there really high, a little bit awkward, and I didn't care much for how tall this was. So I'm actually cutting off the sides of the milk container, and I'm just going to use the top of the cap to smooth out the gum container bottom. For this process, I had some green stuff sitting around, so I use a decent amount of green stuff here. I don't remember how much it cost me. It might not be the most effective thing to use. You could use Super Sculpey or what is that called? Fimo clay or some kind of self-drying clay. But with green stuff, you really want to get a solid base to work with. So I'm just going to slop some on the sides here, just to get that milk carton lid to sit there, and it won't move. It'll create a nice solid base for me to work with later on. Next, I tried to do something with this Sinestro. I have a few of these rings sitting around. I wanted to actually cast this, but the ring indent, you'll see, ends up being a little bit too shallow. The details were not crisp enough, so I didn't feel comfortable using this because that wouldn't cast very well. There'd be a lot of cleanup and it'd be kind of a headache. What I ended up doing instead is I went to my FDM 3D printer and I printed off these guys just using some scraps of FDM that I had laying around. The reason it's two colors is because I ran out of the brown and had to load in some of my orange that I had left over on a roll. I would never throw away, unless it's really short, I wouldn't throw away any of my spools before they're completely used, because I have little projects like this that it's always really nice to just use up those scraps instead of opening up a full fresh roll of filament just for a little disc like this. So I printed all 4 of these at the same time. There's going to be a little bit of cleanup, but I really liked how that looked. So here are all of the Sinestro core symbols. After I cleaned them up, what I did is I took a blade here and I just scraped along the edge to round them out and remove that excess PLA to make them look a little bit more clean, give the edges a little bit more finish and polish to them. And then after that, I pulled out some rubber cement. I thought that this would be a good idea. It ended up not sticking very well, so this part was a little bit of a waste of time. I don't think the contact cement really wanted to bind to the plastic because the plastic is non-porous, so it just ended up sliding around the entire time, even though I gave it a good long while to dry. But they tacked on there decently to start, so I thought it would work, but it just ended up not working at all. And then here I took a scrap piece of 4x4 foam board, and I'm going to use this as my base, except I didn't want it to be quite so big. I wanted it to be able to fit in with most people's dungeon terrain set, and I noticed most people online actually go with a 3x3 setup, so that is what I cut it down to, just using the lines on my cutting mat here. I didn't do any pre-measuring, and maybe I should have, but I figured for my uses the cutting mat was accurate enough. And then after that, I used that cutting mat, the same lines, to just rough in some lines here across so that I could line it up symmetrically and trace around. And then I just cut this circle out, and I want this circle to be a little bit snug so that there's a little bit of a friction fit between the cap and the foam board. So I was really happy with the size that this ended up being, and I kept it like that. I was thinking about cutting out a little bit more, maybe making it circular, but I just stuck with this. And then after that, pull out this Vallejo earth texture. This stuff was pretty cheap. I could link it, the Amazon link, down below. And then with this Vallejo earth texture, this is actually what I ended up using as the binder for my Sinestro core medallions here. I just put a glob of extra texture paint and then smushed the core emblem right down onto the surface. And if I were to do this again, I would probably pre-tape around that separation to get a cleaner line and have to do less cleanup. But overall, I'm pretty happy. I did all the brush strokes in one direction to make it look uniform and like I meant it to be like that. So next here, I just did up a bunch more green stuff and kind of went to town. I wanted this to be smooth, like I said earlier. I wanted an obsidian look, so I really wanted this to be a nice smooth top plinth. So you'll see me really go to town with the green stuff here. And as a hint, it helps to get the green stuff wet when you're sculpting it, because if you guys have ever worked with green stuff, it is tacky stuff. So I just got it wet and smoothed it down, got rid of all the fingerprints as I was going. And this was a fairly easy process. Just being careful not to leave any fingerprints after the fact, and just get it wet and go back. When you think it's good, get it wet one more time and go back over it just to smooth it out, that little bit of extra. And then here I noticed while I was working with The green stuff I actually knocked off some of the texture paint, so I'm going to come back in just with my fingers to touch up the areas where that texture paint got taken off. Next up, once I had everything cleaned up and where I wanted it, I took it out to the garage and I used the Rust-Oleum 2x Ultra Cover metallic oil rubbed bronze paint, and I did a couple of layers on this to seal everything in, make it a little bit more sturdy, and we will also keep this color for the top. This is going to be that top plinth area right next to the statue. So to keep it clean, I wrapped it with some masking tape, and that's going to save us some time later on to prevent us from having to come in and clean up our mistakes. I am a little bit more of a sloppy painter, so I like to masking tape things up to save myself the headache later, and it's easier to fix small mistakes as opposed to big mistakes, especially with a spray can. To add contrast to the statue, I really wanted the bottom to be a lighter gray. I went in with a medium gray. This one happened to be an apple barrel pewter gray from Walmart, and I went in around the Sinestro core emblems, trying to be careful not to get any paint on those, because I wanted to preserve that black base coat for my metallic that I'll be coming in with next. Just go ahead and get the entire bottom. I did 2 layers of paint because it looked streaky after the first one, and then waiting for it to dry once again is the worst part. So while I was waiting for it to dry, I came in with some black Templar and base coated my Sinestro Statue. I didn't use the spray paint for this because I didn't want to cloud up any details. I actually used the black Templar contrast paint because that's a much thinner paint, and I knew that everything would maintain crisp detail with that. With him all dried and base coated, we're gonna come in with our Army Painter Bright Gold. I over saturated my paint. I made it too wet. I wouldn't go quite so thin with my paint. I had to do a few more layers than intended, but I just wicked away that excess paint, dried it off, got a little bit more, and came in and did him with a little bit of a thicker gold paint afterwards. And if you're going to have the gold on your palette, you might as well get the medallions done right away. I like to use kind of a dry brush method. Just run your brush diagonally across these medallions so it picks up the raised edges without getting down into the recesses. I wanted to keep those clean so that they matched the plinth right under the statue itself. After he's all done and looking pretty, we're going to come in with a smaller brush and hit the outer edges of those Sinestro core emblems with that gold. This will make it look more crisp and uniform, and also clean up any of that gray paint that we might have slopped over onto our medallions there. Now on to my second favorite stage, the wash stage. We will be using a Citadel Nuln Oil wash, but if you have any black wash will do. What we're going to do is take this wash over the entire statue, but because these guys have the detail the way that they have it, a little bit more crisp lines, you want to make sure that the wash doesn't pool too hard in a lot of those areas, and you can actually use it to your advantage to hold some of that wash up next to the muscle detail to make sure that it becomes defined. You don't have different colors you're working with, so the mini really has to speak for itself in this stage, and the wash helps it do that. You can see that through this process I'm really directing that wash, taking out some of the pools where I don't want them and pushing them towards those hard lines where I do want them. This gives it a little bit more of a comic book look that I am kind of driving towards. Then after we finish the wash on Sinestro, we are going to move down and use that same wash on the base to bring out the texture paint that we put on there earlier and really start making it look like concrete. I also push a little bit more wash towards those Sinestro core symbols so that you have the distinction, and it cleans up once again any paint overrunning that you might have had, and it'll crisp up those lines between the two features. I did do a dry brush of gold onto the Sinestro statue, and then after that I am going to take a light gray. This one is the apple barrel granite gray, and I'm going to drag it across and hit all of the tops, bringing out that texture paint. And we have the reveal. Get to pull off all of the masking tape and see how well things turned out. There was a little bit of cleanup I had to do by the foot of the statue, but it wasn't too bad, which really helps to keep everything blended in. And I will catch you guys in the final shots. Thanks for joining me here at the Tabletop and Hobby Stop. This has been my one-day Sinestro statue build. If you guys liked it, please hit the like button. That helps out. Also, share, subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I will catch you in the next one.